Om Shanti. I'm sure that a lot of you know Charlie Hogg already. Charlie Hogg is a director of Brahma Kumaris, and Charlie began his lifelong devotion to spirituality and philosophy early in life, spending several years around the world in various communities, Buddhism, Taoism, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Sikh. In 1975, he learned meditation in the London Brahma Kumaris Center and subsequently started a BK Center in his native Melbourne, the first of 40 BK centers in Australia. With his 40 years experience, Charlie is internationally sought after as a spiritual meditation teacher and speaker and retreat leader. And Charlie fervently believes that meditation is a powerful tool to maintain mental, spiritual, and physical health in this increasingly challenging world, not in the least in Hong Kong. And we hope that we will find solace in dealing with fear, sadness, and the future tonight with Charlie. Thank you.
Excuse me. Good evening, everybody. It's really delightful to be here, and very special to see many old friends and new friends, and lovely to have Diana with us also. I've actually, I think, been coming to Hong Kong for 35 or so years, fairly regularly. But this time, my visit, there's been different conversations, and I'm sure you can imagine why. And perhaps many of the conversations settling, talking about this situation. And around the theme, which we're going to explore a little bit tonight, how these situations emerge, an uneasiness, a fear, sometimes a sadness or an anxiety. And I think tonight what we'd really love to do is just have a bit of a heart-to-heart chat about this. We're not analysing the situation. I think, who's had enough of that? Can I say who's had enough of that? I think... But we just really want to maybe explore perhaps what we can do for ourselves from a spiritual perspective. And as you know, the whole world is watching Hong Kong at the moment. There's so much news. And sometimes I think it's almost like a storm. You know how in life a storm seems to brew and then it grows. And once I was in the Caribbean and I met somebody there who told me a story. And as you know, the Caribbean is famous for its beautiful weather, but it's also famous for big cyclones. And there's a lot of shipping lanes that go through the Caribbean. And once there was a lot of ships in the shipping lanes, and suddenly, very suddenly, a huge cyclone emerged. And the Coast Guard, the American Coast Guard, didn't have enough time to warn the ship's captains. So many of them were in the middle of this and they were battered and beaten, and they ended up going into port quite damaged. But one captain, he steered his ship into the cyclone, into the calm center. You know how cyclones spin and there's a calm center. And for one day he just kept his ship in that place. And when he arrived in port, his ship was the least damaged of all. And I think it's a good metaphor for what's happening here, because we can't do a lot about the storm, but we can find that calm center inside. And I feel that sometimes I think spirituality is about a gentle questioning of myself. And perhaps I need to ask, well, seeing what's happening, what do I need to do? And how can I help in this situation? And I was reflecting, actually last night Diana and I met, and I was telling her a story about myself. She said to me, you should tell it tonight. And I grew up in Melbourne, as you heard, and I was quite active with various social movements, and social justice and things like that. And in the 1970s, Australia supported America in the Vietnam War. So I used to demonstrate a lot against the Vietnam War. And once when I was 17, I was in Canberra, and there was a student festival going on, and there was a demonstration, a protest against the war, and I joined the demonstration. And you know, students, when they get a little bit, I don't know what the word is, agitated, excited, one thing led to another. I was arrested and put in jail with 200 of us. And anyway, it was the 1970s. If those of you who remember the 1970s, first hour or two we sang songs like John Lennon's songs. I don't know. I can see the older ones smiling. But when things cooled down, a lot of conversations developed. And you know, I was only 17 years old. I was sitting in the corner of this cell, and there was a lot of leaders of the peace movement. And just listening to these conversations, I realized we were such an angry, negative group of people. And here we were waving the banner for peace. And it gave me such a deep realization. We will never create peace with this type of attitude. And I think that really began my own spiritual journey. And recently I've been thinking, we have over 7 billion people in our world. In Hong Kong there's 7.5 million people. You know, some scientists say that the human mind in a waking day creates about 70,000 unique thought patterns. Now, I quote that figure, and I always say haven't got a clue how they counted them. But just imagine, have that image in your mind, 7.5 billion people, each one pumping out 70,000 thoughts a day. So many of those thoughts are thoughts of fear, sadness, anxiety, worry, insecurity. And it's almost like we're living in this thought soup which is influencing all of us. And I wonder, are my thoughts contributing to the problem? Am I contributing my thoughts of worry and anxiety to increase the atmosphere in our planet? Or am I trying to generate a different quality of thought? And in a way, I think that's what we're talking about here tonight. And I really feel you can't underestimate the power of positive, elevated thinking. And when I look at the world at the moment, I think there's 3 conclusions that I come to. The first is that there's no turning back. You know, a lot of people want to wind back the clock to the good old days. You remember the good old days? I'm not so romantic as that. I think we're going to see increasing instability, increasing social upheavals, increasing economic instability, a more even complex and complicated world. I think it's increasing. Secondly, you know, what is the approach which I need? Like, we need a new approach. And I feel unless we have a new approach, these changes, like what's happening in Hong Kong at the moment, is going to throw us, every new change will throw us into upheaval. So I need a new approach, and often I have the thought, what do I have control over? Someone asked me many years ago, it's a very simple question. Do I have control over the economy, the government? Of course not. My husband, my wife, my kids? Anybody? Getting a lot of shakes of heads with that one. What is my sphere of influence in life, really? Ultimately, where I influence is my thoughts, my feelings, my attitudes, my behaviors, my actions. And in a way, this is the sphere of influence where I can really begin to bring some change. And The third conclusion I come to is we need a new wisdom. And we have a great intellectual ability. You know, most people today have a very developed IQ. It's the sort of, shall we say, wisdom, intelligence that helps me understand the world around me, you know, pass exams, make money. But when these situations happen and we feel afraid, we feel tense, we feel worried, does that sort of intelligence help? I don't think so. I really don't think so. We have emotional intelligence. It's very fashionable, which helps us build rich, loving relationships with others. So important. But the wisdom I think we need now is what I would call spiritual intelligence. And to me, if emotional intelligence is the wisdom to have a rich, loving relationship with others, spiritual intelligence is the wisdom to have a rich, loving relationship with me. I believe when this relationship is dysfunctional and unhealthy, it pollutes everything. And I honestly believe what we're seeing on the streets out here, the chaos and mayhem begins with this first relationship in life. Because all over the world, this first relationship is the seed of everything. And when it's unhealthy, the way I treat myself, the way I talk to myself, you know, if I don't have self-respect, that begins to flow into behaviors, actions, relationships, society, etc. And I really honestly feel unless this first relationship, the most intimate of all, which is me with me, until that becomes healthier, I honestly don't think we're going to see a lot of change in our world around us. And spiritual wisdom is many things really, and I think firstly it's building a really loving relationship with myself. Is it easy to do? Not getting much response. A few. It's not that easy, is it? It's a paradox, isn't it, really, that relationship seems to be one of the hardest things in life. But it also starts to help me understand why I feel afraid, why I feel anxious, why I feel sad sometimes. And you know, for me, I think why we have this atmosphere of fear is because we've created this culture where we invest in everything temporary. You know, we invest in temporary possessions, temporary wealth, temporary positions, temporary careers, temporary image. Can I even say temporary relationships? And what happens? I build up so much fear inside myself of losing them. So the more I attach my heart, the more I build fear. And so when my very cozy little life is threatened by change, it's like I feel, really uncomfortable and totally insecure because it's threatening these things that I've really attached my heart to. And, sometimes I think that the ultimate fear for most of us is the loss of this, isn't it? The loss of our body. And it's not only that, I think it's the loss of my sense of identity, the loss of my sense of who I am as a person, my respect, my successes in life, my achievements. Because sometimes I have had the thought that it's such an unusual life. We're born and we spend a lifetime investing in an identity. Who am I? I'm Charlie. I was born in Australia. I'm a male. I'm this. I'm educated. You build up, build up, build up. You die. And it's like the more we build and invest in that temporary identity, the fear we create of losing that. We all know because that's a part of life today. But I really do feel that the first step I would say, in dealing with fear is to understand that there's nothing but change going on. You know how what they say, the most permanent thing in life is change. And I was once in London at the Brahmakumari's headquarters there, and one of the speakers was John Cleese. Do you know John Cleese? From Monty Python. Pishu immediately began to laugh. He's a comedian, a very famous British comedian. But he was speaking about these things of impermanence. And what he was saying was that, gave a beautiful analogy. Life is like a train journey. And you know, when you're on a train, the train stops at a station. People hop on, people hop off, goes to the next station. People hop on, people hop off. The next station, the same thing. Eventually you hop off the train. Train is life. The nature of life is people come into your life, people go out of your life. Roles, responsibilities come into your life, they go out. You know, everything in life comes and goes. Wisdom is to enjoy it. But as soon as I attach my heart, I start to build this huge amount of fear into my life. And I think, what is permanent in all of this change? And I think that's what I love about spirituality. To me, spirituality is about investing in that which is permanent, so that your foundation is solid. So when the world swirls around you, the storms of change, the storms of upheaval, you have built your life on a solid foundation. And I would say that what's permanent is in all this change is the self. Who am I? And these days when I share about this, I think of the self, there's 3 personalities inside virtually all of us. And before I talk about this, I'm going to clear my throat, excuse me. Excuse me, no, I'm fine. I'm afraid my throat is a bit like this. There's 3 personalities, and I would say 2 of the personalities feed the fear, feed the sadness, feed the anxiety. And, you know, the first personality I call the I of arrogance, or the I of superiority. And this personality takes its whole sense of identity from my body. I see myself as a whole series of labels, you know, gender, nationality, etc. And when this I is ruling my inner system, that's when I have a whole thinking, feeling structure inside. I compare myself with others and I think, I am better, I know more, I am right. When it comes into my feelings, that's when I feel so easily insulted, disrespected, not valued, sensitive. You know? So when the seed of a wrong identity is sown in my thinking, it produces all these feelings and emotions. And I would say the more ego I have, the more fear I have. But this I is really a cover for the second I, which I often call the I of lack of self-respect, or the I of inferiority. I feel it's this I that's ruling our world at the moment. And this I also takes its whole sense of identity from the labels of my body. And I compare with others, but I think others are better, others know more, others are right. Others don't love me, others don't value me, others don't respect me. Have you ever had these sort of thoughts going around? And when it comes into my feelings, I feel hopeless, inadequate, inferior, I'd say depressed. And to me, depression in a psychological way is a sadness actually. It's a sadness that my dream in life to be loved, to be valued, to be respected hasn't really happened. But I would say in spirituality, Depression is like a mourning for the loss of my true identity. I'm living my life, but who am I? And when I come under the influence of my ego and lack of self-respect, what's the experience of life? One day you're up, flying. The next day, crash. You know how that happens sometimes? Maybe you don't, I'm not sure. You know, the huge mood swings because I'm under the influence of these two eyes. The third eye is the original eye. And I feel what's happening here is signaling us it's not just enough to have a belief that I'm something more than a body. 80% of us have this understanding that I'm something more than a temporary body. I'm actually the permanent soul. And a lot of spirituality is this wonderful journey of taking this idea and converting it into an experience. That in fact the soul is a wonder. The soul is just a point. In mathematics a point exists, but it has no physical size. I, the self, the soul, the eternal self, sit in the front of the brain around the pituitary gland. I came into this body and I'm going to leave this body. I'm the permanent self. And in a way, when I begin, are you listening? Should I use another microphone?
I turn this off, but I think there's something.
Is this a bit fuzzy? Sorry, maybe I'll use this. Hello, is that better? So it's like I begin to invest in my permanent self. And this is really the beginning of a meditation practice, that I sit quietly. And even though I observe all this upheaval around me, I go internally and I reconnect with who I really am. That I am a soul. The soul is eternal, immortal, non-physical energy. And when I reconnect, this is my permanent sense of identity. It's almost like I lay the foundation of something which is permanent. Myself, even though change is happening around me, I have a permanent relationship with myself. And secondly, and in a moment I think, thank you, Diana. Diana's going to lead us in a little bit of discussion and questions. I think that I often feel the nature of the human spirit is to search for true love. Love is at the heart of a quality life. And the nature of our life is we invest our heart in relationships. We give everything. You think how much you've given to your loved ones and your family. But there's that huge human dilemma, and that is that no relationship is permanent. Whether it's time, whether it's change, whether it's conflict, whether it's death. And that's why it's made us so insecure inside. But what spirituality says is to explore the one relationship that's permanent. And that's the relationship of I, the permanent soul. The soul is non-physical, the consciousness which resides in the center of the forehead with the Supreme Soul. And this is a relationship which spans, shall we say, life and death. And I often think, just as I am a soul, I do actions, I reap the fruit of my actions. I know happiness, I know sorrow. But we're exploring a relationship with a soul that's beyond that, that remains pristine, uninfluenced, shall we say pure, and full of love and peace and power. It's not a concept or an intellectual idea or a belief, but I'm actually communicating with a real, living, conscious being. And this is really what meditation is to turn my mind from the past and all the other things and begin to gently rest my mind in this direction. And sometimes I like to use the example, it's almost like the Supreme Soul, God, whatever you like to say, is on the FM wavelength. When I forget who I am and I'm under the influence of my ego and lack of self-respect, I'm only in a body-conscious state, I'm on the AM wavelength. Now, you know the FM wavelength exists, but can you tune in when you're on an AM station? I don't think so. So you have to go up to the FM wavelength. It's like, and then the reality of this connection is there. And you know, just the last thing I want to share now before we start to chat is that recently I've found that when you talk about meditation, I think people have a yearning to meditate because it means I will find peace in that beautiful commentary. But on the other hand, I think a lot of people try meditation and find it pretty difficult. Because when you sit in silence, you become more aware of the vagaries of your mind and how your mind just seems to be overthinking and pulled in so many different directions. So a lot of people deep down think, I can't do it. I think everyone else can, but I can't. And that's why I feel it's actually using the most natural thing of our consciousness. You know, the most natural thing of our consciousness is to remember. While I'm speaking, the thread of your intellect has been remembering, you know, a family member, what you just did, what you have to do, what someone said, you know. Actually, you are constantly remembering. And all we're doing is refocusing what is most natural. So if you sit here and you remember a family member, it's like you plug into that thought and three things happen. Whatever you remember, you plug into, you are influenced by instantly. And whatever you're influenced by, you download a feeling into your mind. So if you remember a family member that you get on well with, you have a good relationship, the instant you touch, you're influenced by that positive relationship, you feel comfortable. But if you remember, the subtle thread instantly touches a thought of a family member you're in conflict with, you're having differences. Instantly you touch, you know, that anxiety, that discomfort, that fear touches. And so what are we doing throughout the day? We're plugging into all these thoughts of the past, of people, of problems, of the Hong Kong situation. Is it any wonder that whatever I remember, I'm influenced by, and that creates the feeling in my mind? The absolute logic of Raja Yoga is first to remember my permanent self. And the nature of the permanent self is peace. And the more I remember who I am, and I educate myself to convert the belief into a feeling, I harness a peace that is just one thought away. It's real. But secondly, I remember the lover of the soul as I go about my life. That's just a thought away. I remember the Supreme Soul. It's not like a prayer. It's not like a devotion. I don't have to be religious. I'm just remembering a being that's pure and clean. And I download a sense of love and a sense of power into the sacred space of my mind. The more I do this, it's like I lay a platform. I have a connection to my permanent self. I have a permanent relationship. And as people and their moods change, as the city goes into upheaval, as things happen, but internally I remain, you know, I've got a framework to build an inner stability. Because fear is an emotion experience, an anticipation of pain, evil, or danger, whether real or imagined. And, they say that I once was at a place and someone asked me, how much fear is real and how much is imagined? My answer was, I wouldn't have a clue. And then this person said, I Googled it, and you know how Google is God these days, and said that Google says 93% of our fear is imagined fear. That's what anxiety is. Anxiety is where I think of the future and I create scenarios in my head of what might happen. And I think that's the big question in the heads of humanity. We can't enjoy now because there's so much anxiety about what might happen. And that's why I really feel none of us really have control over the situation, but we have control over my reaction. And if I invest in this, go deep, deep, deep into this permanent relationship with self and the one with the divine, with God, you really have a platform to, develop an inner stability. So I'm going to put a full stop on myself. And
we have a lot of questions. I hope all of you will ask Charlie questions. But one thing is that I think what you talked about fear and anxiety, it really pervades Hong Kong right now. Most people are filled with uncertainties about our future and filled with anger at the government or whatever. So in this environment, what do we do? How can we alleviate this negativity? I'm told that the other day I was reminded that at this stage the universal and individual soul is at an ebb. The energy is very low worldwide. Which opens us up to vices rather than the five virtues. So what can we really do?
We're going to try again, so thank you. Yeah, I think that one of the things in life today is we totally underestimate the power of our thoughts. And, we can't legislate change. None of us can really do that sort of thing. But what we can do is learn more about who we are, because, the atmosphere created by all these minds is very powerful. And there's 3 A's, I call it: awareness, attitude, atmosphere. We create awareness in our mind, our attitude propels it, and we create an atmosphere. And why have we got this atmosphere that Diana just described? Because we're all pumping out those sorts of thoughts. At least in my sphere, if there's one person who's pumping out a different quality of thought, isn't over agitated, it definitely has an influence. And I had an experience, I don't know, it's a long time ago now, 25 years, but I was in South Africa when Nelson Mandela became the president. And it was an amazing time. I don't need to go into all the history, but it was like a country of 45 million people having a party. But the BKs had a retreat in what they call the Orange Free State, which was owned by a very big Afrikaner man, a white Afrikaner. And, he had built gun turrets around his house because he expected that as soon as, Nelson Mandela won the election, the Africans would come and take back the land. And I asked him, why didn't it happen? And he thought about it and he said, Nelson Mandela. And in a way, the behavior, the example of one person influenced 40 million people. Because he always opposed apartheid, but he never hated the people who were holding their positions. And I think it's a little bit like that for us at the moment, that, you know, we can work for a better atmosphere. But if we're an example, if we really try to reconnect with who I am and create a more positive attitude, and the less that we get into all the conversations of what might happen, and sometimes very negative attitudes towards those who have a different perspective to me, because it's almost like we're filling the thought soup with more and more negativity. And, you know, we may say, well, that's not very effective. Personally, I feel each one of us meets so many. And you all know that when you meet somebody who's loving or kind or has a beautiful smile, it lightens up your day, right? It has an influence. And if we just make a decision even tonight, okay, I don't know what the outcome of this is, but I'm going to try to uplift everybody. And the image I have for me at the moment is my mind is like a perfume. And when you remember who you are, you have peace, you connect with the divine, you experience love, the fragrance of your mind can fill a room and can uplift spirits. Really, you can't underestimate the influence that has in your life. And when many people start to do it, I think we can spread a much more positive atmosphere. You know, as you can see, I am an idealist. But what else is there? If you don't have your ideals, if you don't try, we can be consumed by the negativity in the atmosphere.
I echo my sometime teacher. In your lessons, you've always been really positive. Do you have any positive input to discuss with me?
To me, this knowledge of I'm a soul and I'm a peaceful soul and I'm going to this body is just temporary. So when I meditate, I invest in my I'm really invested in my real self, and that gives me very, very steady lifestyle because I don't get shaken by other things because I am sorry. So this knowledge really, really changed me. And sometimes I come to my class and we really have very good time exploring.
Can we have some questions from the floor? Need to share with us how you feel about the situation, or how any thoughts about how this stuff.
What about all the news and all the negative? Would you get on the phone, doesn't that affect you? It's so annoying.
I find that too. I mean, I get about 100 a day, and lots of different.
So much understand.
You know,
So lies. Fake news.
Well, so how do you react to that?
That's not reading it.
Yeah, that's
you know, I think we are at a time where I'd say the biggest issue in the world is mental health. It really is. You know, the World Health Organization says 1 in 4 of us is suffering from clinical depression. My own feeling is it's probably much higher than that. To me, that indicates there's such fundamental things about life that are not really true, that it's creating. So we have to become wise to care for my mind. And if all this information that Wendy was just talking about disturbs me, I think we have to limit myself to listening to all those things, because the nature of the human soul at the moment, we feel empty inside. There's a big vacuum. It's why I believe we run around, chasing our tails, feeling we're busy. Because if we stop, sometimes this sadness, this emptiness, this vacuum emerges. So let's just keep running, telling myself I'm important and I'm busy, because it just fills life up, really. But when I'm empty, we all need love. We all need peace. So if you give me love, I absorb it. The mind, I sometimes think is like a vacuum cleaner. You give me peace, I absorb it. But if you insult me, I absorb that. And if you criticize me, I absorb absolutely everything. The more I am influenced, it's a sign I've lost my spiritual power. I might have intellectual power, but I don't have resilience. I don't have that spiritual power. And that's why I think the more I don't just believe, it's not enough to believe. And I often say today, there's 3 approaches to spirituality. One is like a hobby. You just do it every so often. You rock up to the Raj Yoga Center, have a fix for a few hours, so to speak. Or it's like a discipline. And that's good. But you know what I find these days is a lot of people meditate, but as soon as they stop meditating, their mind reverts to their old thinking. We just go back to the old thinking, old perceptions. What works today is when it becomes a lifestyle, where you really, in a sense, you live as a peaceful soul. That is who I am. And I put this structure in a day to care for my inner world. And if something disturbs me or influences me, rather than allowing it like a big storm inside my head, I need practices to cool myself down and come back to who I am. Unless I care for myself, really, I think we begin to become more and more consumed by this thought soup. I think you know what I mean by the thought soup. It's powerful. It's really powerful. And that's what I'm finding. A lot of people that were always quite okay, they're finding they're feeling more unstable, more fragile, more anxious, because we're absorbing, because we're empty. The framework of the mind is just like the vacuum cleaner absorbing this atmosphere. To me, the positive side of this whole thing is really we have to go back to the roots of our spirituality and not just, as a hobby, but really put a little lifestyle into my day.
Do you mean regular meditation?
Yeah. Not only regular meditation. To me, meditation's an attitude to life. It's a decision that I'm going to be positive. I'm going to see good in people. There's a whole set of decisions because it makes you feel better. It's not that you don't see the weakness in others, but you choose to focus on the positive. You're not naive because it makes you feel better. If you see the good in people and talk about it, how do you feel? When you gossip about people, how do you feel? We all know the effect of these actions and behaviors. And that's where really building this little structure into my life is, for me, I wake up and I meditate every single day. And so many times people say, well, I'm too busy. As someone once said to me, I'm too busy to be peaceful. I mean, you think about it, that's what we're saying in a way. That is the most common question in all our centers all around the world. We get so disturbed by others.
Did everyone hear the question?
Yeah. She was just saying that, you want to be peaceful, but when people behave badly or rude or difficult, yeah. But because in a way it's a symptom of the culture of the world today that we're so empty, so we're looking to everybody else to fill my emptiness. So when they love me, I'm fine, and when they're difficult, I'm like a puppet dancing to the tune of the behaviors of people around me. And what happens is that the blame culture begins, because I think that your behavior and your attitude is disturbing me. But the first law of spirituality says I am responsible for how I feel. Because they behave badly, it's true, they are rude, that's true. But I have a choice whether I allow it to disturb me or not. Well, I'm going to ask everybody here, is it easy? Is it easy? Everyone in this room's living with a few or working with a few really difficult people. It's the nature of life today. But we have to learn to sustain a quality of thought. And I think when you practice who you are, your self-respect increases and you are less influenced by people, their attitudes, their beliefs, their behaviors. And honestly, I can say I've changed enormously in this way. When I started this, I was quite sensitive, like most people. That a little thing, have you ever been amazed something so tiny can hurt you so deeply? That's the sign we've lost our spiritual strength. And rather than put it back on the other person, life is saying, I've got to take my power back again. And that's where really when I put a little, practice into my daily life, I rebuild my self-respect, I rebuild my power, and that makes me more resilient to the behaviors. But, there's many strategies we can use, because you can maybe say that, I respect you, but I don't want to listen to any of this anymore. Because why are people like this? Because they lack self-respect. And they complain and criticize everybody and feel very negative about life. I'm not so sure. Deep down, I think.
Well, I'm told that in some philosophical teachings that if you hate somebody, you feel, then actually you are benefiting their karma, and your karma is suffering because you hate. So sometimes I tell myself, okay, it's your karma. So, I have a hard time liking Carrie Lam right now. So I'm trying to remember. You have any suggestions?
One thing which Diana and you've just mentioned is that I think the Brahma Kumaris offer a beautiful approach to all this, to have good wishes and pure feelings for others. It's like the perfume of your mind gives people that support. And people are going through so much. I often feel when people are difficult or rude, deep down they don't like themselves. Even when people are angry, it's scary, isn't it? But actually they're saying, help me, help me. Anger is a sign of total loss of self-control. We can be so judgmental of each other these days. And yet I think when you go deep into your spirituality, we have more compassion. When people are difficult, people are rude, people are this, people are that. But I have to learn to protect myself. And I would say one of the things I've observed is that when I really have a deep link with God, when I really, it's not just a belief, I really know how to turn my mind and absorb my mind in this loving relationship. It's almost automatically you're pulled beyond influence. You're present, you're loving, you're kind, you're connected, but you don't absorb all the stuff anymore. The language we use is detachment. And it's a word which some people, as soon as you say the word, they start wriggling in their seats. They feel uncomfortable. But we often say, really an elevated state of spirituality is to be very loving, very caring, very close, but detached, which is uninfluenced by. Actually, the more you're detached, the more you're effective to help other people. Detachment isn't being cut off, isn't being aloof or uncaring. It's actually the opposite, because you can really, to be truly loving, you have to be detached. Because when you're detached, you can love the people in a good mood, but you can love them when they're difficult too. And that's the thing that really transforms people. I once worked with a man who was incredibly difficult, and I just experimented with having a really positive attitude. It was like a little, I don't know what you would say, it was just an experiment. I was amazed how he softened. It was absolutely incredible how he really softened when someone, because he was so used to people not liking him. He expected you because he knew he was difficult. Really, I think if we can take power ourselves, we can spread a good atmosphere in the world.
If any of you are taking steps personally or in your community on how to deal with the situation in Hong Kong right now.
Just pray. Meditate what you can do. And I alone can only give good wishes and praise. We are working sense and meditations to bring about peace.
What?
Chanting.
Oh, okay. Do you do that every day?
Weekly.
Anyone else? You nodded. No? You have any?
I think I've heard, I'm actually just visiting for a couple of months from out of town, and as I speak to people, I hear that it's really now children in primary schools and secondary schools who are under a lot of pressure to stand up and protest and sing these songs, and so I think that there should be more of an outreach for those kids so they understand what they're fighting for, what they're being steered towards, and I think people just aren't really paying attention to that, and
I think they are.
I
I'll
mean-
reserve my comments, but I think people are trying to help the young people.
I mean, young is like, you think of just those protesters, but I think this is a level younger than those protesters. They're not protesting, but they're being affected. So, what do you say to people like that?
Well,
How
I
do
think,
you go about it?
first of all, I think a lot of the young people, like 10-year-olds, are also protesters. They're not exactly, just standing by.
How do you stand by that?
I think young people, if older people around them are peaceful and stable, that has a huge influence on young people. They work off example. And so, a lot of people come to a place like this, and the first thing they say, I'd really love my children to meditate. I always feel if you meditate well, they learn from who you are automatically. They'll take. It's the same with a teacher in a school too. If a teacher uses language, if a teacher doesn't over-exaggerate the situation and even talks about, actually I'm responsible for managing my thoughts. Yes, it's chaotic out there, but if I choose to absorb the chaos in my mind, that's my... children actually can take in a lot. But our example, in fact, for everybody, when you meet somebody, it's like what I was saying with Nelson Mandela. One person influenced almost a whole country. It could have been incredibly violent, but he modeled a different behavior, and that really... So I don't think we should underestimate our example in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces. If we just model an attitude which is respectful to everybody, peaceful, yeah, it has a huge influence.
Does anyone have any more comments? If not,
Can you wrap this up with some words of wisdom?
I think just the final thing I'd like to say is that I know it's easy to come and sort of talk in theoretical terms, but really I'm a believer that there's benefit in everything. And I think a lot of us feel the culture of the world is very superficial today. And maybe these things, they're difficult, but they take us back to our roots. What is really important in life is really, I think, to know who I am, explore the relationship with God, and really be a good human being to other people around me. And I have a friend in Australia who's a palliative care physician. In other words, he deals with people when they're dying. And he's often told me when people are dying, no matter what they've achieved in their life, there's two things that are important on their mind. What sort of person was I, and how did I treat other people? This is how we assess ourselves. And that's really what's really important in life. So sometimes I think if this situation is making us think deeply, what do I really want in my life? Maybe spending time for my spirituality is an investment in my well-being and my whole family, like your question. One person can influence so many. And I suppose I really just feel that, often we think, getting into a regular pattern of meditation is difficult. But actually, it's an act of love for myself, and when you do, I think it's really the best investment in quality of life I can really do. So I hope everyone becomes more regular in your spiritual practice.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Diana.
Thank you.
So what I would like to do is just finish with a meditation, if that's okay. And if we can just play a little bit of music, and I'll just speak out some thoughts. And if, just for these few moments, if we can just all remain seated. Let me sit quietly and calmly. And just reflect on the situation around me. A lot of my dear friends, family, brothers and sisters are feeling afraid. And anxious about the future. We can all feel an atmosphere of tension and upheaval. And yet I choose to go within and reconnect with my source of peace. Because even though I'm only one individual, my peace of mind is the seed of change. When many of us reconnect with my permanent self, we begin to radiate a different vibration into the atmosphere. Just visualize yourself as the eternal soul. A tiny spark of life energy sitting in the front of the brain, in the center of the forehead. I am the permanent self that lives and acts through my temporary body. When I forget who I am, my mind goes into overdrive with so many thoughts. But the more I begin to let go, step back from the consciousness of the temporary self, and begin to sit lightly in the forehead, I taste peace. Just feel this sweet feeling of peace, filling the sacred space of your mind. And just feel yourself relaxing, letting go. I am a peaceful soul. And in this state of self-awareness, I look through the eye of my mind and I see the shining light, the radiant jewel of God. A soul that remains eternally constant, unchanging, an unlimited source of peace and love. And I begin to connect with that source, rather than my mind wandering to the past, to the future, to the situation, I choose to remember the lover of the soul, and the instant I touch, I feel influenced by that strength. I feel stronger. And it's like I download this divine energy into myself. Just allow yourself to be loved. And when this love enters the core of my being, I feel a deep healing taking place. My self-respect begins to improve. The more I rebuild my inner strength and my self-respect, I can support others. I can have good wishes for those who agree with me, and even those who disagree with me. I see my life is to spread good vibrations wherever I go. The perfume of my mind, of love, respect, colors the atmosphere. This is really a beautiful life. And a life that will uplift others around me. If each morning I wake and I meditate and I carry these feelings into the day, then I won't be so influenced by the situation we're all facing. And in my own little way, I can positively influence everyone who comes in touch with me. To meditate regularly is an act of love for myself.